Okay, so welcome back to the Oberg Guitars Factory. Today I want to talk a little bit about French polishing, and I've had a couple of students get down toward the end in their final sessions and not quite know how to make the distinction between working with less shellac and the rest of the technique that's involved in those final sessions relative to when you're bodying and trying to get it built up. So the guitar here is pretty much ready to go. I could probably finish right now, but I'm going to do another session because I would like a little more shellac on there. And so I'm going to take you through the process of what will be my final session. And I'll just talk you through it as we go. So I'm going to get up and try to focus the camera on a spot where you can pretty much see what's going on, and we'll just go from there. And for those of you who've been giving me grief about not playing guitar music, I have guitar music on today. So there. So this is my setup here. I have the guitar clamped in, I forget the name of these vices. I've had this thing for a really long time and I never use it, and then I thought if I just put some cork pads epoxied to the inside of the jaws, then I can clamp my guitar this way, and then the lower bout is just resting on the bench. It's just touching on the, basically on the top bindings in one very small area, so it doesn't need to even be cushioned really. So I'm going to be doing the back here, and let me back this out just a touch. And I'll show you what I'm doing in terms of charging the pad and the whole deal, and hopefully you'll be able to see what's going on. Okay, so this is my cover. This is an old piece of old, worn, fairly close weave linen, and what I use for the inside is raw cotton, like cotton from the inside of a futon or just cotton batting. And then a la Marcus Dominelli, I put pill bottle finer cotton around the outside, which helps keep the sort of rougher, less refined bits of cotton, the hard pieces of stuff, from migrating through and poking into the linen and causing a problem with your polish. So I'm going to start. I like this pad. This pad's been working really well, so I can see where I was most recently working with, so I'm going to move to a different spot on here and basically do the standard thing of twisting the pad around the contents of the inside, and then I'm going to do what I call conditioning the pad. The pad's a little bit dry, and I don't want it dry, obviously don't want it really wet, but also there's going to be some residue of shellac and oil from previous sessions on the pad, so I'm going to get it fairly wet with alcohol right now. And it's a good idea when you're charging your pad to keep it away from your work. All you need to do is splatter one bit of alcohol on there, and you've set yourself back probably a substantial amount of work in order to have to go back and repair it. So I'm going to whack this thing on the hand to kind of distribute that alcohol in the pad, and then I'm going to just blot it until I get a majority of this alcohol out of the pad. So what I'm doing again is saturating the cover and the pad beneath it to basically kind of clean it out a little bit, condition it, get it ready for a new fresh charge. I could move to a new cover on the outside, but I like the way this one's been working. So depending on how much alcohol you put in there in order to do this, it could take a little bit to blot it out. So I keep a couple of pieces. This is just copy paper from the printer. So I'm going to keep blotting this until I start to see the weave So with a medium, and this is obviously going to depend on how much pressure you're putting on here. I mean, I'm leaning on this pretty heavy, but if I lighten up with my pressure, you can see that a little bit of the weave of the linen is starting to show, which means I'm starting to blot enough alcohol out of the cover and the pad that it's getting close to the point where I can use it. This is pretty wet. I used kind of probably a little too much alcohol. Okay, now I'm starting to get there. Pretty close. Okay, now you can see there's a lot more weave of the linen starting to show. So the pad's just about in the right place. I'm going to show you another little trick that can be kind of dangerous with the Bunsen burner effect if you're not careful, but sometimes you get a little bit of fuzz and a little bit of lint on here regardless of what your cover material is, and if you just touch it with a flame, it's going to light on fire, right, because of the alcohol, but it'll singe away a majority of that. Now, in polishing, you're bound to get some lint depending on if you have air moving in the shop, if you're polishing in the same place that you're doing your woodworking, which I do. I don't have a dedicated room for polishing, which is kind of a drag, but that's the way it goes. So, you know, any little thing helps. So, okay, so now I'm ready to charge the pad. And because I'm at the final stage here, I'm not going to be working with that much shellac in the pad. And I want to make sure there's not a whole bunch of dust or lint or whatever. There isn't much in the room right now. I didn't do any woodworking yesterday in here, so it's pretty good. I'm just wiping off a little bit of the oil that was left over from yesterday, which is not much at all. A tiny bit of oil on there. So I'm going to start with charging the pad with shellac, and I'm going to use, maybe 10 drops. 1, 2, 3, 4. I used 12, and this is about a 2-pound cut, roughly. Because it's been open and I've had it around for a while, it's probably a little thicker on the shellac side, less heavy of a cut. So I put 12. So I'm going to put almost an equal amount of alcohol in here as well. Almost, a little less. That was like 9 or 10 drops. Now, you can work with a wetter pad and adjust your pressure, or work with a wetter pad and blot it to the point where you want it. But I don't want to blot any of this because I don't want to waste the shellac, number one, and I kind of know where I'm going with just how wet the pad is. So now I want to whack it a few times on here, basically to kind of distribute it throughout. And then I'm going to put a single drop of oil on here. This is olive oil. Just kind of touch it in a few spots and spread it around. And then I'm going to start in polishing, and I'm going to be polishing with a very light touch. And at some point, hopefully, I'll get into a place with the lighting where you can see this vapor trail that it's leaving behind, which of course is the alcohol evaporating, leaving the shellac behind. And the most critical thing with polishing always, and especially at this stage, is to get that balance right between how wet your pad is, how much oil you're using, and how much pressure you're using. Now there's a whole bunch of other factors as well to think about, and one of the most important ones is this: what's going on with the temperature and the humidity. I was listening to Michael Thames talk about polishing the other day on one of his YouTube videos, and he was saying something to the effect of this is a good day. That this particular day when he was polishing on the video, that it was a good day and that the gods were smiling on him or something like that. And it's an important point, because you can come out and feel real charged up and ready to go and polishing. You got to get a certain amount done, and it's just not going right. You know, something's happening. It's sticky. The pad's not right. Somehow you've got your proportion of oil. Now I don't know if you can see this or not, but this is just about perfect right now. I've got a nice vapor trail behind, and I've got, maybe I could use a tiny bit more oil. You can check how much, well actually it's perfect by doing a light finger swipe, and you can see the smear and judge by that. If you've got a big smeary streak on there and it's all over your finger, you've got way too much oil, and it's just going to complicate things. It's going to clog your pad. The pad's not going to feed correctly. So as you can see, I'm working entirely with circles and overlapping, and often I'll choose an area and, you know, try to develop a sequence of going after it, like working a certain quadrant, and then I'll move to the next quadrant. Right now I'm just working across the grain in rows and coming back and starting again. And I'm still working with relatively light pressure, which I'm going to start adjusting at some point without sort of thinking about it, because I'll be able to see that this vapor trail is getting a little less, and I can tell by the feel of the pad that it's going to at some point start to be drying out. But right now it's working perfectly right now. Now obviously, if you're watching this video, you know enough about French polishing that when you stop with the pad and you go back on, you always stay in motion. You know, you don't want to stop with the pad. You never want to set the pad down, or you're just going to have a problem area and you're going to have to go back and fix that. So what I do is, when I'm approaching the side, I always switch directions. I'm heading clockwise right now, but I know I'm going to be going back, so I just switch to counterclockwise. And then when I get over here close, I'm going to switch to the other direction. I find it awkward to be moving in this direction and then go back. I always want to be moving in across the edge. And the edges are a little weird, and you want to be in as much control as possible when you're working on the edges, because you don't want to slip off and damage something. Okay, the pad is still feeding. With that 10 or 12 drops, I could probably polish for 20 minutes. You know, maybe 15 minutes. Depending on the rest of the conditions. But I've basically done these circles long enough that I'm going to switch to doing figure eights, and I'm just going to work half of the back and go all the way up. And then when I go down to do the other half, I'm not going to take the pad off. I'm just going to move down here and make a few circles and then go back to this. There's nobody here telling me that I can't make weird shapes with the pad, or I have to start and stop in any particular fashion. It's kind of like roping when you're doing bindings. There's no reason why you have to keep this perfectly logical, symmetrical roping pattern that looks really beautiful when you're done. I mean, it looks nice, but you know, practically speaking, you do what you need to do, and don't worry about some ideal situation. Now, when I get back up, it's still feeding, although I can tell that the vapor trail that it's leaving behind is getting more subtle now. I can tell that the amount of oil is perfect. I can still see a vapor trail, but like I said, it's getting a little more subtle, which means my pad is starting to dry out a little bit, and I'm starting ever so slightly to increase the pressure a little bit more. Okay, now I'm going to do some long passes on here, and this is laying down this micro thickness, probably immeasurably thin. I mean, I'm sure there's probably some way you could measure it, but it's just incredibly thin. And if you draw it out like this, and I'm lifting off and then I'm landing, always in motion. then this helps to keep the final product sort of more level. Of course, at this point, working with such a lightly charged pad that it's not like I could really leave any streaks anywhere. Okay, so now the trail of alcohol behind is almost indistinct. You almost can't see it. I can see it because I kind of know what it looks like and what it should look like, distinguished from that little bit of oil smear that's also going on. I'm increasing the pressure now because of the visual, and also I know that about at this point that the pad is starting to dry out a little more, and I can feel it, that if I don't increase the pressure and the movement at the same time, that it'll actually start to sort of stick, and if it sticks again, I'm gonna have a problem. So I'm gonna go back. I'm just gonna keep doing this now. You probably can't see this, but there's virtually no, or just a very, very barely perceptible streak of alcohol behind it. And if you can see the way the guitar's kind of moving a little bit here because of a little bit of instability in the sort of clamping setup, then you can sort of picture maybe how much I'm pressing. I mean, I'm leaning on it pretty good right now. So what I'm really doing is, rather than laying down shellac so much as it's moving the shellac around some too. It's moving it around a little bit, and it's burnishing it. The linen is burnishing it along with the pressure. Now at this point, because I want to get a little bit of that oil off before, as I move toward the end of this session, I'm going to put about, let's say, 5 drops of just alcohol. And then I'm just going to go back and start in, and I can see just ever so slightly that vapor trail is back because it's alcohol. Now, it's not just alcohol, because there's some shellac in the linen still kind of dried or starting to dry in there, so this frees that up a little bit. So I'm actually doing a little bit more polishing now. Even though I didn't charge it with shellac, I can tell that, and I can smell it too. This is another thing that you can pay attention to. The smell will change. I know that sounds kind of weird, but at certain points the smell will either get more intense or it'll go away, and you can sort of tell, given the rest of the criteria, sort of what's going on with the polishing. Another thing I'll do when I get to this stage is start in the center and do concentric circles out. And like I said, I'm leaning on this pretty good right now. And then as I approach the perimeter, I slow down because I don't want to slip off the edge. So it's a little tricky. And if you're doing something like this, when you're polishing, keep your elbow tucked in tight. You have a lot more control than if your elbow is out here. You can really control it better. So I'll do a circle there, and then I'll start in the very middle at the waist and do concentric circles here. And then I'll go up here and do another one. Again, this is just another way of moving around what tiny bit of shellac is coming out of here, and the alcohol is moving and leveling and burnishing right now, because I'm not laying down any shellac any longer. It's just the tiniest amount. So I'm going to go over this again at least once, if not maybe twice, because I can see there's no alcohol vapor trail any longer. All I see is the slightest oil smear from the oil. When I call it a smear, it sounds like there's a lot of oil on there, but there's not. So I'm kind of getting down to the last few minutes of this session, and I'm using pretty good pressure right now. And when approaching the edge, I'm lightening up on my pressure a little bit because it's kind of dangerous, like we talked about before. And getting up onto the heel cap, you know, as long as you finish in such a way that you don't stop, you're going to get finish up there. I already know I have plenty of finish up there. I would probably be concentrating on it a little more. Okay, so I can tell from the look of it now and how long I've been at it that I'm basically done for this particular charge on the pad. Now, if this were, the first of my final sessions, I would charge the pad again and do 2 charges maybe, and then let the guitar sit so that the alcohol can completely evaporate a little more over time. Actually, it's pretty much already evaporated, but more like cure, so it can cure for a little bit. Now, if I were polishing the top, there's no way I could work with this much pressure except in the upper bout. So you have to kind of make a judgment call there about knowing how stiff your top is braced and how much pressure it can take. Okay, so I'm going to quit now and put my pad away. If you can hang on just a second, I'm going to put a little squirt of alcohol into the jar so the pad won't dry out quite as much as it did this last time. And then I'm going to close up these. Okay, so now you've done your polishing, basically. And I think this is actually the last bit of polishing I'm going to do. So I'm going to show you another little trick here that helps with burnishing and bringing up the shine, which is already there pretty. It can't get a whole lot shinier. Is take the butt of your palm, and you can start with light pressure. Again, this is a judgment call. And just do some burnishing. The heat and the pressure from your palm. Let's see, I need to tighten this up. Just a touch, sorry about that. Is burnishing this finish. If there are any little streaks, this is actually a really handy way of, let's say you started out and your pad was a little too wet, and so the first couple of passes that you made left some swirl marks. Now ordinarily as you keep going, those swirl marks will disappear because you're laying down finer and finer layers, and it's melding together. You know, one layer is basically, as you go over an area, your pad has alcohol in it, right? So the alcohol is a solvent for the shellac, so it's kind of melting the layer and at the same time joining them together. So if you have one of those and everything else looks really perfect, you can get rid of some of those as long as they're not really heavy and your pad wasn't soaking wet with this method. Now,